Anyhow, welcome everybody. My name is Gittie Neufeld, and it's really my pleasure and privilege to be the moderator of tonight's session, which is a question. And the question is home always the best option? So why am I standing in front of you as the moderator? I sort of have gone through a lot of this. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I live in Far Rockaway. My mother-in-law was widowed before I was married, and she lived alone at home until she was 90 years old in Washington Heights. Continued to go to work every day. Very feisty, independent lady. Knew everybody's birthdays. You got your birthday card. My kids always said, like, Amma has a special thing with the post office because only their birthday cards came on time. Anything anybody else mailed on that day wouldn't come at the same time, but Amma's cards always came at the same time. When she hit about 90, she was still going to the doctor herself. She was still shopping herself. She was still doing her laundry in her apartment by herself. And then she would go to the doctor, and I would call her and say, "Mom, what did the doctor say?" And she'd go, "You know these young doctors, they all mumble." So I had to call the doctor and find out what the doctor said. Or she would tell me on Monday that she had gone to the grocery, and on Tuesday that she had gone to the grocery, and on Wednesday that she had gone to the grocery. "Ma, did you really go every day?" She goes, "Yeah, I can't carry more than that one shopping bag with a container of milk and a half pound of bread." In Washington Heights, people buy bread by the half pound. So, by the half pound of bread. So I ended up coming for about 2 years. I was going to Washington Heights after a full day of work and with children at home. I was going to Washington Heights every day. Monday was laundry. Tuesday, because she had osteoporosis, it was difficult for her to lean into the washing machine and take the stuff out. And she was tiny. She made me look tall, which is why I loved her. I loved her for a lot of reasons. Tuesday would be the butcher. Wednesday would be the whatever it was. Every day there was another errand. And it was not easy. And we said, "Mom, really you should consider coming to live with us." "No, God forbid. I don't want to be a burden on anybody. I don't want to live with anyone." And Erev Yom Kippur, she fell and broke her hip. And we just didn't take her home to her apartment. We, in 6 weeks, built an apartment, added it to our house. I live on a corner, so she even had her own address. We live on Sage Street. Amma lived on Central Avenue. The two houses, the two apartments. You see, you're stuck here. You can't leave. Okay, the two apartments were connected by a common living room. Okay, it's a sign. Okay, the two apartments were connected through their living rooms. There was a door between the two living rooms, so my mother-in-law had her own privacy. We could get to her. We actually had an alarm thing on the wall. It was very funny because we needed something that lit up so she could see it at night, so it said push to exit, which was the joke in the family, that if Amma had trouble, she was going to push to exit.
Hope there's no fire in it.
Yeah, right, and it would ring when she needed help. She was able to eat breakfast and lunch. She had a little kitchen. She was able to eat breakfast and lunch on her own. Although my children, and I publicly acknowledge their chesed continually, my sons would come home from yeshiva and eat lunch with her every day. They would take turns coming home and eating lunch, so she had some company. And then she would eat dinner with us in our house every day. And she needed help moving and dressing and bathing. I bathed her, I dressed her. She had a walker in the house and a wheelchair for outside of the house. And that's really how she lived with us until she passed away. She suffered a major heart attack on her, just around her 91st birthday, and passed away 12 days after that heart attack. I felt like I was the most neglectful person in the world when in the Hatzalah ambulance they said to me, "Who's her cardiologist?" And I had a list of doctors like this, and she didn't have a cardiologist because she never had a heart problem until that age. But it was a challenge. It was not an easy thing to do. It was a challenge. You lose your privacy. Not only does the parent lose their independence in some ways, but you lose your independence. There were no vacations. There was, if I wanted to go out to a wedding, I would make sure that one of my married children at least stopped by and make sure that Amma's okay. I couldn't leave until I had her in bed because I was afraid for her to walk into her bed. Like, she could get around, but lying down is a whole different thing than sitting on a chair. And it was not simple. The bracha, the blessing side of it was that I had children, married children in the neighborhood. My grandchildren, who were her great-grandchildren, would stop off just on the way home from school, just pass in, run in, get the cookie, and keep on going. And to have that connection with a great-grandmother is really an extraordinary privilege. And I think I sort of started last time a little differently, and I'm going to bring it back here. The culture in which this is occurring is important. I grew up, my parents are Holocaust survivors. I was the only girl in my grade in Beis Yaakov Borough Park that was the firstborn daughter that was not named after a grandmother, because I had grandparents. I had 3 grandparents growing up. My other grandfather passed away shortly before my parents got married. My last grandmother passed away when my daughter was 15. So I saw parents taking care of elderly parents in a variety of situations, and I think many people in my age group did not see that as a result of what our parents went through. They did not have elderly parents to care for. That was one model. My father was diagnosed 15 years ago with dementia. And my father never wanted to go to a nursing home. Never wanted. He said, I'm going to die in my own bed. And he was already limited cognitively, but he was able to say, this is the rabbi who should answer any questions that we have, and I'm staying here. And he used to walk around and say, my name is Yaroslavich, and I live on 58th Street, and I'll die on 58th Street. Like, that was it. This is where he was going to be. And my mother takes care of my father with utmost devotion and care. For 14 years, she cared for him at home, as he slowly lost his ability to talk, to walk, to feed himself, to toilet himself, to bathe himself, to shave himself, etc., etc. And eventually, we started having to add caregivers, paid caregivers, first a little bit, then a little more, then a little more, and it ended up being 24-hour care. But my mother was definitely on top of it. My mother was the one who was supervising his care. I don't know if you remember, there's an article in the Mishpacha magazine a few years ago about dementia, about caring for parents at home. It starts off with, Gittie Neufeld was worried, that's me. And it really, I feel bad because the article really presented my mother as not the primary caregiver and the primary person who made the decisions and made the choices, and she really was and is. A year ago, my father was very, very sick. He had sepsis and pneumonia and other wonderful things, and he needed a tracheotomy and a feeding tube. And he's been in and out between nursing home and hospital ever since. I do say that they told us a year ago, exactly today, he's not going to make it to New Year's Day. So, no offense, Dr. Carrey. What a doctor. Okay. But it really has been a roller coaster ride. And my mother cried bitter tears when we signed the papers to admit him to a nursing home, because she said, this is not what Tati wanted. But my mother, at 80, could not care for a trach and a feeding tube, etc., 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 and this was not the option. So this has been my life. This has been my obsession for the last 15 years, worrying about how to take care of parents. And I ended the last session with something I'm going to start with, which is a mother can bring up, or a parent can bring up 10 children, and 10 children still have a very hard time taking care of one mother. But it really is our privilege to be able to do that and to try to, in some way, give them the comfort and the quality of life and the safety that they so richly deserve. Not only that they're entitled to, but that they deserve. So basically what we're going to be doing here is exploring some of the options that are available in terms of caring for a parent. People always say, oh, you put your father in a nursing home? I didn't put him in a nursing home. His dementia put him in a nursing home. His physical illness put him in a nursing home. We're doing what we can do that's best. And to explore the options, what are the options available? Is home care the best option? Am I really a rotten kid for not doing for my father what I did for my mother-in-law? What are the differences between those two cases? So the way we're going to work this is that we're going to be hearing first from Dr. Carrey and then from Brian Rosenman. I'm going to introduce each one of them to you. Each one is going to speak for about 7 to 10 minutes, telling you their aspect of it. You have index cards with questions that you can write questions on. Then we will open the floor to questions, but we're going to do it in writing just so that it's easier. If people have common questions, it's just easier to see that. If anything is left unanswered, or if you have a very particular case, I'll ask you to please just email your question to info@achiezer.org. They will channel the question to the appropriate person and get back to you with an answer. So with no further ado, it's really my honor to introduce Dr. Zev Carrey. Dr. Carrey is an attending physician specializing in internal medicine, pulmonary medicine, and critical care medicine. He's a member of AFSEL as well as being a member of the AFSEL Far Rockaway Five-Town Medical Board. He's a longtime Far Rockaway resident, and his current practice includes homebound patient care as well as assisted living and nursing home patients. With no further ado, Dr. Carrey.
Thank you for that warm introduction. I'm not the only long-time Far Rockaway resident here, as I look around the room.
Me too.
But thank you very much, and thank you again to Achiezer, the institution that's sponsoring the sessions tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about patients as they get, or family members as they get a little bit elderly, and how we decide where the best place to care for them is. As we mentioned in the earlier session, this really could also apply to others that might require the care, family members who may get sick at a younger age that might need the care, and most of this will be appropriate for them also. But the question we're really addressing is, should they be taken care of at home? Are there other options? Which options work out the best? So we live in a society where we are getting older and the needs for patients are getting more challenging. There are economic issues, there are health issues, there are social issues, and the question is, how do we go about in handling it, and how are we supposed to make the decisions? We also need to know, before we even get off on that track, is how do we even recognize that there's a problem? So Ms. Neufeld, suggested that at a certain time you realize things are not going well. So there was a story about Mr. Goldsmith was driving home from work one day, and Mrs. Goldsmith, Bubby Goldsmith, his wife, calls him on his cell phone, and she says, "Oh dear, I'm so glad to hear you're okay in the car." So Mr. Goldsmith says to his wife, "What's the problem?" She said, "Well, I heard on the radio that there's somebody driving on the highway in the wrong direction." He says, "1 second." He looks out the window. He says, "No, dear, everybody's driving in the wrong direction." So the two aspects of this story which I think are important is, one is sometimes there's a sentinel event in somebody's health life, and something happens and we suddenly realize something is changing, and we need to make changes, and we need to start taking control of what's going on. The other aspect, which Ms. Neufeld alluded to, which I think is important, is that our society has taken the view in many aspects that when patients get less functional and older, that maybe they don't need to have the same attention paid to them as they did in the earlier parts of their lives. And our society and conferences like this prove that we really are perhaps driving in the wrong direction among everybody else. We still believe that everybody should be getting proper care, proper honor, proper support, and that's really one of the things we're here to discuss in this session. So we know that science has done a lot to try to define things, to try to come up with alternatives and ways to reverse processes. That doesn't always work. There are social organizations that try to figure out ways that we can handle different types of patients, and there are actually laws out there to protect the elderly, to make sure that they're getting proper care and not being mistreated. But in order to figure out the best way to decide is where someone belongs, should they be home, should they be somewhere else, I thought that we usually like to look at our holy books. We look at the Chumash. So in the last few weeks we discussed Yaakov and his sons, and over again we see Yaakov and his sons are collaborating on their decision to get food from Mitzrayim. So Yaakov and his sons are in Canaan, and it seems like they're all probably living within either the same house or in the same neighborhood, because they go collectively to get the food. In fact, this week's parsha, when Yosef sends back for Yaakov, he says, "Go back and get your father and pack up your households and come down to Mitzrayim." But I saw a very interesting medrash this week's parsha, Vayechi, and it said when Yosef sent his sons to Yaakov for bracha, it says he sent his sons, and then Yaakov says, "Oh, who's there?" And he says, "Yosef is here with his two sons." So the Zakein and Balatosva says, why did Yaakov have to ask who was there? Weren't they all in the same setting? And it says that Yosef used to avoid sending his kids over to visit Yaakov because he was scared that Yaakov would ask, "How did you guys end up in Mitzrayim in the first place?" And he would hear that Yosef was sold. So they avoided having that discussion, but it seems that they were not living in the same place. The concern, just to finish the medrash, the concern was that Yaakov, when he cursed Rachel inadvertently, and he said, "Whoever has the truffim, whoever has the idols will be punished," he didn't really mean that Rachel should be punished, yet even inadvertently she was punished very severely. So the concern was if he found out that the brothers sold Yosef to Mitzrayim, he would curse them intentionally, and that could bring down the whole world because his curse would be so powerful. As an aside, I'm not really sure what Yaakov thought. Does anybody know what Yaakov thought? Like, how did Yosef end up in Mitzrayim? But we see that Yaakov and Yosef were not necessarily living in the same place. And living in the same place was not necessarily the style of the time. We do know that even in our society, the elderly do require, and they do get, a certain amount of honor and a certain amount of support. The question is, how far do we take that, and how much do we put ourselves out in order to do that? As we change biologically and as we change physically, there becomes a bigger gap and a bigger disconnect between the younger society and the older society. And the question is, when we take care of the older society, is the home the best place to take care of them? We do know that our goal in general of taking care of any patient, especially the elderly and the patient, the infirmed, is that they should be somewhere where they are healthy, they can be maintained in a healthy condition, it should be safe, and it should be a place where we can avoid them having repeat visits to hospitals or emergency rooms or to other facilities. And some of the questions that came up in the last session were exactly that. What do we do if someone is home and they have to have these repeated visits to the hospital? So I'm going to discuss a couple of issues that we need to take into account when we try to make a decision. Where is the best place for someone to go? Is it best for them to be home, or, as Brian will discuss, the assisted living facilities, or even beyond that, a full-blown nursing home where all their cares are taken care of? So I will hopefully raise more questions than I will answer. But the questions I raise are questions that need to be addressed before someone makes a decision. Are we going to take care of somebody at home? And anybody who's been involved with it, even a small amount, or anybody who's been involved in it to the nth degree, knows that these issues may seem small when you discuss it, but when they actually take place, they are very significant. And that's not even taking into account the things that we haven't considered. So I'm going to bring up some of the issues that we think about when we try to make these decisions, and you could try to place it on your own, person that you're thinking about. We do know that everybody is unique and everyone's situation is unique. But let's just start. The first thing we need to know is what medical conditions are being cared for. Is this something that's reversible, something like pneumonia, where if you treat it and they get better, they'll be back where they started? Or is it a chronic condition? There are patients who have, let's say, long-standing emphysema. They need oxygen and they can't get around. So they have different needs. What if it's a condition that is progressive, let's say a dementia, and we know that whatever point they are up to now, in a few months from now, in a year from now, a few years from now, it may be different. Or is it something that, lo aleinu, is something like a terminal disease which is progressively deteriorating and their condition may change within weeks or months? We have to take those into consideration when we're deciding where should we care for that patient along the way. Another basic piece of information is what medications are these patients taking? Are they medications that they could self-administer? Are they medications that they have to be given? If somebody has an aide at home, it's no longer legal for an aide who's not trained and licensed to provide medications to a patient, even if those medications are already pre-set. So if someone has a pill box that's set up by one of the children, and then they have an aide at home, if you have an aide from an agency, they won't allow that aide to provide the medications because they're no longer licensed to do that. So just giving medications could be a very challenging thing. What if the patient is getting intravenous medications, either temporarily or on a long-term basis? Is there someone there at home who could be trained to take care of it? What if the medications are changed and there's new interactions? Who's going to know that there's something to look after? Who's going to know that each new medication may have a side effect that we didn't anticipate before? Who's going to provide the medical care? Is there a nurse that can come to the house? Is there a physician that can come to the house? Is there a physician you can call or go to when you need something changed? That's not always such a luxury that not everybody has availability. What if the patient needs a consultation? What if, and they can't leave the house? Is there a way to get that consultation done at home? If there's a consultation they can get out, do you have means of transporting them to that place? What if they need lab tests done or x-rays done? So nowadays there are a lot more facilities that will actually come to the home and do these things. There are places that will do x-rays, places that will come and draw labs on a daily basis. Some of the places we actually will get some of those results faster at home that we will then when we get them in a facility. What's the patient's state of cognition? Are they alert? Are they completely cognitive of what's going on? Or do they have confusion? Do they have dementia? Are they sometimes patients who will actually be comatose? Is that patient appropriately to be kept at home? Do we have the facilities to take care of them? What about moods and mood swings? A lot of patients, when they get elderly, can develop depression, either because it's a clinical depression or for other reasons. Can we treat them and can we take care of it? What if they get anxious? What about patients who get combative? Can you handle that at home? Will the aide or the family members be able to tolerate those outbursts? What about just feeding them? Will somebody take the time to feed somebody who needs help being fed? If they have a feeding tube, or is anybody trained to actually handle that feeding tube? When I go to Camp Simcha in the summertime, so we have a large number of campers who actually have feeding tubes, and we manage to train these high school kids who are called their counselors, and they learn very quickly how to handle things like their feeding tubes. But is there somebody at home who can do that? Is the aide who's available to do that, can they do that? What about communications? Is the person able to communicate their needs or their feelings, or if they're in pain? Do they have a hearing aid? Can they hear? Can they express themselves? Do they have a telephone that is especially equipped for them if they can't hear very well? What if they have to get someplace? What if they have to get from point A to point B in the house? Do they need a walker? Is a cane enough? Do they have a motorized scooter? What if they have to go somewhere else to get things done? Is it availability to get them to consultations? Is there availability to get them to visits in other homes? We know accessoride is very helpful, but is it the patient somebody who is amenable to go on an accessoride type of transport? What about simple things like bathing? Do they have the facilities in the home to bathe them? So we know nowadays there are ways of designing a bathroom to make it into a shower bathroom. So you can have sort of all built into one bathroom. You don't have to worry about the floors getting wet. You don't have to worry about the ceilings getting wet. You can have a chair for a shower right next to the toilet. You can have bars to make it more safe. So those things can be done in the home setting as well. What about companionship, which is a big issue that comes up? And the concept of companionship is we know that patients really need that interaction. Is the interaction going to be acceptable? So we know sometimes patients will stay home and they have the interaction is even greater than it would be no matter where else they would go. If you have children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, like Mrs. Neufeld's example, that's really something that's hard to even describe. That's something that's sort of priceless. But if it's someone who's going to be at home and there's going to be no neighbors to come in, all the family members live in another part of the state or maybe another part of the country, or the family members go on vacation often and they leave the person behind alone, that may be something that's really challenging and not necessarily the safest thing to do if you leave them at home and you don't take care of that. What happens if there's an emergency and somebody is home? Do you know who to call and who can handle it? Do you know who's available for an emergency? If it's, obviously in many of our communities we have AFSEL, but some of the more suburban areas don't have AFSEL as readily accessible. What about simple things like shopping and groceries? Is there someone who's going to be able to make sure that their shelves are kept full? What about if they have a medical device like a peg, a feeding tube? Maybe they need a lift. Maybe they have other types of catheters that need to be treated and taken care of and cleaned. Is there somebody available to take care of all of that? And then end-of-life issues need to be discussed. I believe there's another session discussing end-of-life issues as we speak. But end-of-life issues are important because if somebody is home, everybody has to be on board. What do you do in the case of an emergency? What do you do if things take a drastic turn for the worse? Is everybody on board? Does everybody understand those needs? And of course, there's the social support besides family and friends. Just within the community, other people can help out. And then a little bit distance from that are things like insurance. Is the insurance going to help you pay for some of these things that you need? Sometimes the insurance is much better at paying for things at home, or sometimes it's better when the patient does not stay home. You have to know what you're entitled to, and you have to know how to try to navigate that system, which again is beyond the scope of this session, but something that has to be taken into account. And legal issues come up as well, and all these things are important. So the basic message is that home care does provide some ways priceless or
Invaluable.
Sorry?
Invaluable.
Types of exposure for the patient and invaluable types of relationships. It will, be something that we will cherish. It will be something that your children and your family and your community will learn from. So those things are things we could try to do. It's not for everybody. And sometimes staying at home will not be the safest thing to do. And sometimes staying at home will not be the best for the patient as well. So those things have to be considered before you make those decisions. And you have to make them very carefully and make sure you contact all the people involved that may be involved in taking care of that patient. So So in closing for my session, I would just like to thank, besides Achiezer, I'd like to say, as I said before, I'd like to thank those people who are here. Because like in the story, we are, as a society, we are probably driving in the wrong direction. When you go to the hospital, the first thing they ask you is, do you want to sign the DNR and you want to do a do not intubate order? The first thing they're interested in is sort of withdrawing care. We don't live in that type of society. There may be a role for that, but generally speaking, we want to care for our zikanim. We want to give them the respect that they do. We want to follow the right path. So it's because people like you attend conferences like this that shows that that's really where we come from. So it's really a thanks to everybody participating that makes these things come true. And all we could do is try to help you achieve those goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Carrey. So, home caring for parents at home is an option, but there's a continuum of options even within that. Stopping off and saying, hi, Ma, how you doing? Or just making a phone call, or daily visits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next step is moving outside of the home. So to discuss that, I'm proud and pleased to tell you that we have Brian Rosenman of Comprehensive Eldercare. Comprehensive Eldercare is a healthcare company which was formed by healthcare professionals for the purpose of encompassing and providing all services needed to properly care for and cater to the elderly population. Their team of geriatric case managers determines the level of service that each client requires to live their fullest and most comfortable lifestyle. In order to meet those needs, they also provide services such as Elder Check, Wellness Watch, in-home companions, medication management, etc. They also specialize in the operation of assisted living facilities in the Northeast under the leadership of their founder and CEO, Brian Rosenman. Mr. Rosenman is a recognized assisted living operator in the Northeast with substantial concentration in the New York State market. So Brian's going to talk about assisted living and touch on nursing homes a little bit, or Dr. Carrey will touch on that. And then, as I said, questions on the card so that we can sort of combine similar questions and get a more comprehensive answer.
Thank you, Mrs. Neufeld, and thank you to Achiezer for putting this wonderful conference together. I'm an assisted living operator in the state of New York, and today I'm here to speak to you about assisted living, one of the options for your loved ones. I'll start off by giving a brief explanation exactly what is assisted living for those who probably don't know what it is. When home is no longer a safe or beneficial option, assisted living may be the best. In assisted living, the individual might have different living quarters, such as a private room or a semi-private room, or maybe even a studio. At the same time, the person has their own quarters. This individual is part of a community where there are daily activities, meals, and snacks, and 24 hours a day staff to help you, that individual, with whatever needs they might have. It gives the individual an opportunity to have all the assistance that they need, that they may be getting home at before, but while living in an environment that provides them with a constant stimulation, socialization, and supervision. Assisted living really is balancing independence with care. And why do I say that? Because when a person is able to do things on their own, they're encouraged to do so, and are given cues to remind them of taking care of their activities of daily living, which are dressing, grooming, and showering, things that you and I would do on a daily basis. For those that need more assistance with these activities, the staff is there to help them in any way they may need. What's unique about assisted living is that you can age in place, meaning individual might move into an assisted living community, meaning needing minimal help with all those items I've discussed, but can remain in the same facility as they age and need more assistance, and be still getting that assistance exactly in the same place, thereby accomplishing the goal of aging in place. People need to view assisted living as their loved one's home. It's not a facility, it's not institutionalizing them, it's their home, it's grandma's home. Somewhere they socialize, have activities, can have guests over, and go out when they please. In an assisted living community, there's no worry about laundry or housekeeping, because that's all taken care of for the staff. A major part of assisted living is really medication management and pharmacy services. The facility will make sure that the proper medication is given to that resident as per doctor's orders, as many times a day as necessary. Doctors, professionals, nurses will come on site to the assisted living community, just like nurses would come to the home, thereby assuring your loved one is getting medical care that they need and not missing appointments to the doctor. If a visit to a specialist is necessary, the facility will arrange for the resident to be taken out to the appropriate doctor. Additionally, services like lab, x-rays, Physical therapy, occupational therapy, even wound care comes right into the facility. Even hospice care is necessary if it's an option in an assisted living community. Social work is also part of licensed assisted living. A social worker will follow your mom or dad or loved one's case to make sure they're getting the best care that they deserve. This greatly reduces the burden on the family. Missed doctor's appointments is a constant problem with elderly living home alone, especially when family do not live nearby. Of course, children will always love to be there for their parents as much as possible, but there are 24 hours in a day. This gives the family the ability to have peace of mind that a loved one is always being watched over and taken care of, even when they can't be there themselves. Although, of course, they are welcome to visit as often as they would like. Mealtime is also very important. Many elderly living at home alone do not eat proper meals. A lot of people know that. Oftentimes, children come to visit and find old food in the refrigerator, or we might have food sent to them in the freezer, untouched. In the assisted living, the residents are supervised by mealtimes to ensure that they're getting the proper nutrition that they need. Furthermore, a licensed nutritionist is required by law to plan each meal with proper nutritional guidelines. Finally, the facility is required to weigh each resident on a monthly basis to ensure that the weight remains at a healthy level. In assisted living community, the family does not lose control. They become part of a bigger team to care for their loved one, but obviously always have the ultimate say in their decisions regarding their loved one's care. As a caregiver, how would you know that it may be time for your loved one to go into an assisted living? There are various signs, and some are quite obvious. You may be finding bills unpaid. You may be finding your loved one isn't eating properly. You may find that your loved one is falling and trying to hide it from you when you visit them. Or they're becoming more forgetful. You may find he or she not taking their medication when they should. They may be becoming isolated at their home due to the inability to go out like they used to. You just notice that they're not thriving at home as you'd like them to do. There are many services that an elderly person can get at home, no doubt. However, especially when children live out of town, assisted living is a better option. The staff is in charge of their care, and they are constantly being monitored in an assisted living community. We are your advocates for your loved one. When an elderly person is stuck at home with limited social interaction and activities, their minds are not being stimulated. And that can lead to depression or loneliness or just failure to thrive. A story comes to mind with a family whose loved one lived in one of my assisted living communities a few years ago. As with every admission, a pre-admission interview is required by law, and we go down to meet the family, the potential resident, and the family member. I remember very clearly when I came into the house, the lady was sitting, we'll call her Sophia, lady was sitting at the dining room table, sleeping. She had a TV on the table, blaring, what I would assume was a good soap opera. And a 24-hour aide in another chair next to her also passed out. When I was speaking with the daughter who accompanied me on this visit, she told me very clear, Brian, she will not participate in all your activities that you are, quote-unquote, selling. Not surprising to me, she thrived in the community for 3 years. Not only did she participate in every planned activity, she got better. She was the talk of the facility. Months later, I received a letter after she had passed that the daughter wrote to me thanking me and myself and the facility that we brought her mom back to life. Assisted living is not for everybody. Dr. Carrey has expressed and will express further that home care is a wonderful option for many people. But at the end of the day, sitting in a room, in a living room, with 4 walls and an aide next to you is not really the best option for a mom. If she could be in an environment where there's socialization, planned meals, being weighed, making sure she gets proper nutrition, visitors coming in and out, that is a better option for some of our loved ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so we've addressed, or at least raised questions about home care. We've raised some issues about assisted living. The next step on the continuum is a nursing home or a nursing home facility. And one point that I want to make that I think is coming up in questions is that there's no right answer for any one person, and there's no, even for that same person, what is appropriate today may not be appropriate in 3 months or 6 months or in a year from now, and there needs to be a constant reevaluation of the situation and a realistic reevaluation. You know how when you see a child every day, you don't realize that they grew, but when they come home from camp at the end of the summer, it's like, what happened? And the same thing happens with a parent. You don't necessarily see that day-to-day change, but there need to be periodic benchmarks and stops where you say, let me think about this. Is mom or is dad doing what they were doing before, etc. So the final, I don't want to say final, that's not nice. Okay, the next step on the continuum is the nursing home option, and although it's really not the focus of this, I think it would just be fair to have Dr. Carrey address that in a couple of minutes.
It's really very brief. In the continuum that we're speaking about, although home care is sometimes replaces both assisted living and the ultimate, nursing home type situation, sometimes even the assisted living situation, which have advanced greatly over the last number of years. What they provide now is much greater and much more closely monitored than it was before. But there are patients who get to a point sometimes where they can't participate even in the components that are necessary to be part of an assisted living. They may not be able to come down to the dining room. They may not be eating. They may not be really alert or conscious of their surroundings. So there is a step beyond what we're really here to speak about, called what we call the nursing home, which sometimes there is, they're no longer eligible for an assisted living, and if they're not able to be cared for at home, that's where they would go. But as Brian has pointed out, is that the assisted livings are definitely getting more sophisticated, and their ability to care for patients is getting even greater. So the margins between assisted living and nursing home is getting blurred even further. But there is, just for completeness sake, in the continuum, there is a state called nursing home which takes care of patients who cannot take care of themselves in any way whatsoever. But
Okay, I'm going to open the floor to questions and ask you to pass forward the cards if you have any questions. Some people pass them forward to me already. If anybody else has cards, feel free. So actually, I feel great because I can answer one of these questions. Somebody said, is there a doctor on call in Flatbush to come to the house on a regular basis or come to your home if you're ill? I don't know. Really what you need to do, there's two options. One is in whatever area you're in, call the regular doctor and say, will you come to my home?
Yes, there is.
Oh, okay.
There is. And I'll give you my card, whoever asked the question.
Okay, but let me just give you, information gathering is important. You can call the doctor individually and ask them. You can also access, in our area, Achiezer has lists of doctors and they can help you out with that. Bikur Cholim in your neighborhood, Echo, etc. You can ask them and they do maintain this information if the person is available. Okay, we also had a question on, I lost my cards over here.
That's non-licensed.
Okay, sorry. Okay, we had a question on, okay, I don't even know what this stands for. Welcome to acronyms, 107. How do NORCS?
NORCS.
How do NORCS, I think, come from ORC?
Nope.
Okay. How do
Naturally occurring retirement communities.
How do naturally occurring retirement communities and adult daycare fit into the continuum of care? Brian?
Well, adult daycare is something where a person can go out every day and then have a social environment. Most of them are they're social model.
There's also a medical model.
There's also a medical model. And the nurse has to be attached to a nursing home.
Correct.
So yeah, that's part of home care, I think. Because if someone has the ability to go out to a daycare, that gives them that socialization aspect, and they're not cooped up in the home. So you've solved your problem there. But again, it's a Band-Aid, I think. Because after a while, it just stops working. And today is windy and tomorrow is raining. And I'm not going. That's my experience.
Brian, you're going to get a lot of questions today. Are assisted living facilities Are assisted living facilities ever covered by Medicaid, or are they always privately funded?
Yes, so in the state of New York, as we live in New York, there are Medicaid facilities known as the ALP program, Assisted Living Program. What's different in New York than other states. Other states, if someone is a Medicaid recipient, they have what's called the Medicaid waiver program, where technically you can go to any assisted living community and say, I like your building, I want my loved one to be in your building, here's my Medicaid, they'll pay you for the services. Not in New York. In New York, the facility has to have that bed. What is occurring and has been occurring over time, the health department and the state of New York has opened up more beds for assisted living Medicaid because they're noticing that people require care and people are getting older and there's more people getting older, but they don't require the nursing home care and they really belong in assisted living. So the short answer is there are Medicaid facilities, and there will be more as time goes on.
And how do you find them? Like, how does one
Excuse me,
navigate that?
could you like me down the basket?
Okay. I'm sorry, you had a
So I was just
question?
asking a follow-up question. How do you navigate that process of finding those that are part of the ALF program?
You can go online. Everything's online. You Google New York State Department of Health, adult homes, and there's a map of New York, and you click on your county, or you call Brian, right?
Okay,
Um,
and his contact information is in the the pad that you got has all the vendors' contact information, I believe. In in the bag that you got, there's a notepad in there. And it has- Okay,
I am medicated. Come
actually,
on.
Brian had mentioned something that I think is
Fill out
important.
tomorrow.
He said you can go online and look. A lot of information is available online if you know where to look. For example, and I'm going to give the next question to Brian again. You can just sit here for a while. Okay, the difference between licensed and non-licensed facilities, and why is that important?
In the state of New York, an individual or a place cannot provide personal care without a license. It's simple. Because the health department wants to make sure that they're providing a certain level of care. Now, that doesn't mean that someone can't open a building and call it a senior hotel, but they are not providing the care. So, when shopping for an assisted living community, besides calling
Or a
me,
nursing home.
or a nursing home, you should ask them for a copy of their license. It has to be posted, and their last survey, which by law has to be posted. You're not being the bad person, you're being the smart consumer.
And a question for Dr. Carrey. Which is safer, home care, assisted living, or the nursing home?
Safer.
This is such an educated audience.
Let's wrap it up.
So the answer is, obviously, the answer is it depends. Because it depends on what level the home care is being provided. It depends on how closely it's being monitored. I'm not sure that every assisted living is at the caliber of one Brian runs. So it depends. The other thing is that the personal interaction may be greater in an assisted living depending on the individual, depending on the neighborhood and the individual, may be much greater if they're in their home. We had in our neighborhood recently somebody in her late 90s was Nifteris. She didn't have any family in the neighborhood, and she's been home for she's been home for her whole life, but in the last 5 years, she was in the hospital once for pneumonia, and that was it. And she was cared for by her neighbors, and the people in the neighborhood were able to provide her care. And she flourished because she had a constant flow of people in and out. Not everybody has that. And those people in and out, and her caregivers that were taking care of her, were just unlicensed aides, made sure nothing, if she sneezed, somebody knew about it. So in some ways, that may have been safer for her, but it really depends on the specific setting, the severity of the patient's condition, and who is available to provide the care.
Which sort of addresses the other question, which are what are the main barriers to home care?
So I think the main barriers to home care are that all the services that we've spoken about are not necessarily in place for everybody automatically. The family very often has to make sure those things are in place, has to make the arrangements, has to do a lot of the legwork. You don't have the social worker necessarily on site who's going to help you do these things. So you lose out on some of that. On the other hand, sometimes the visiting nurse services are exceptional at taking care of these things, and they will make sure these services are provided. So the answer is that
It depends.
it depends.
Dr. Carey answers a lot of questions, but it depends, but it really does. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so I just want to thank everybody for coming, and I really want to say one more thing. The fact that you're sitting in this room is evidence that you are in fact driving against traffic, and that you are really trying to make a change and trying to do something right for a loved one in whatever format that right will take. And all I can do is to wish you all the strength and the kayach and the clarity to make the decisions and the strength to carry them out. And if you ever need help, Achiezer 516-791-4444, and we'll get back to you. Okay. The next part of the evening is there's food is replenished downstairs. The keynote will be happening at 8:15 in the room where the vendors are.